Ben, welcome to the TED Talks podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Where are we sitting right now?
We are sitting in my latest development in South Kensington, Queensgate.
South Kensington, where the parking costs 20 quid an hour. So
yes, not far off.
Yeah, this is high end. So people who are listening to the TED Talks podcast and who are watching this, you will have seen a video of this development beforehand. But then you are the first, what I call London developer or investor to come on this podcast. So I have so many questions. I was just thinking, how am I going to get them all in? So let's start off with, before you were doing property, if there was anything else, what were you doing?
I've always done property really, unless you go way back when I started off working at McDonald's when I was about 16. But since I was 18, I've been in property. I started off as a local agent in Hayes.
Oh, I live literally in Hayes.
There you go, yeah, called Peter Rolfe.
Oh yeah.
And they were great, but the owner actually told me that I probably shouldn't be in property. I should go to uni because I asked too many questions, which I always laugh back at now after spending like 16 years in the property market. But you know.
So then, how did you go from being an estate agent to actually physically doing property?
So I purchased a flat when I was 19 and needed a lot of work out in Wood Green as my home, and did the work to it, lived in it, didn't particularly enjoy living that far over, so ended up selling it and then moving closer to my parents, which was in Northwood, and I purchased another flat there. And any flat I've ever bought, even when it's been my own home, I've always done work to. So I kind of learnt the building trade through doing my own homes at the time, and eventually I moved across to buying property in Maida Vale, which was kind of my original development patch. Mm-hmm. So I purchased a basement flat there, which was in a real state. We got planning permission to add 2 extensions to it, added about 250 square feet. Yeah, wow. And opened up, put 17 RSJs into it. It was a big...
How many?
17, yeah. It was a big first project to take on. I kind of always just jump in with things. I mean, obviously it's calculated, but I always think if you just get the property, then you can figure out what you're going to do with it once you've got the offer accepted. Not once you've exchanged. Yeah. Once you've got the offer accepted. I'm not going to give bad advice to people. But you know, if you're sure it's a good property, get it agreed, and then you know you've got normally 2, 3, 4 weeks to figure out what you're going to do with it. And you know, if the worst comes to worst, you can walk away from it. But no, I haven't had to do that really. So yeah, I kind of was quite impulsive on that, as I tend to be, and it was a good deal. And made quite a bit of money on it, and I'd spotted that W93 and W92, which are the cheaper parts of Maida Vale, were significantly undervalued at the time. I thought on a pound per square foot basis that they were trading at sort of £600-700 a square foot, and Little Venice Prime Maida Vale was selling at 1100 to 1500 a square foot, and it was only half a mile away. So I then sort of piled into that area and bought as much stock as I could in Maida Vale, in sort of in and around Elgin Avenue, that sort of area, if you know Maida Vale. And I guess had a bit of luck as well. The market in sort of 2013, 2014 was buoyant, and I would probably say 2014 was the peak of the London market if you were to sort of average it out. And so that obviously helped. But bought some good flats, added some good value, and then I met my now business partner, and which enabled me to expand the business and grow it. So that's kind of how it happened.
When you were buying these flats in Maida Vale, was there like a long-term goal, or was it kind of like, let's buy some flats, make some money, sell them on, and just see how it goes?
I've always, since the first flat on Elgin Avenue, I've always been flipping. I've never really looked to hold on to things, other than the properties I've lived in as my own. So yeah, I guess I always wanted to be trading flats, and doing them up. And I'd worked as an agent for a long time. By that point, I'd worked at Foxtons for 4 years in the sort of boom years of 2004 to 2008. And I went into commercial property for a couple of years into the serviced office business, which I kind of wish I knew how massive that would be now.
Yeah.
Because I can remember some of the guys now who've got billion-dollar companies who were literally starting out in serviced offices in 2008 back then, and now they've got like the Office Group, who were literally just 2 guys starting out when I was in the industry. And I look at it now, I'm like, maybe I didn't go into the right one. There's always something bigger and better than you, right?
Always.
But, and then I went back into a estate agency for Marsh & Parsons. and then left to set up my sort of development business.
And with those first few deals, because a lot of people who live in or around London say, well, I can't buy stuff here because I need 50, 100 grand just for the deposit.
Yeah.
How were you funding things at those times, back in those times?
So I was quite lucky because I bought my first flat very young. I was 19, so I'm 34 now, so it's 15 and a bit years ago. And I'd had quite a few years of capital growth from my own homes, which obviously was massive help. And I sold a flat that I owned and I was living in Northwood and raised, I think, I can't remember the exact figures, but probably 150k back then, which is probably 250k now equivalent. And I used that to purchase the first one. But then I also, I spoke to my parents who, you know, they're comfortable, they're not particularly wealthy parents, but I sort of said, look, I'm going to go into development. Do you want to come in with me as sort of partners? But, you know, you'll need to put the same sort of money that I'm putting in, and they agreed. So I was lucky on that front. I'm an only child, so I haven't got 5 brothers and sisters where it would have made it a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So again, you need a little bit of luck when you do things, but I would have done it on my own regardless, but I had, because of them, I was able to buy 2 rather than 1. And they agreed to sell their house when they were away on holiday in America, and by the time they come back, I was ready to exchange on their house sale. My mum was like, "Oh, when do we move out?" I was like, "We exchange actually next Friday." And
so you better pack it back.
Yeah, no, luckily we had a month delay completion, but they then put the same equity in with me, and we bought another property. So we were buying 2 at the time.
Yeah.
So that enabled me to grow the business a little bit. But it's, you know, also it's been good for them because they've been treated like any investors would be. They've been paid their returns and they've done well out of the business. So I think they're happy with their choice.
I think also it's like time. I think people don't realise property is something that over time can literally start something or create a lot of wealth just by sitting there and doing nothing.
Yeah.
And it's good that you say that so people listening can understand, hold on, you didn't just pull it out of thin air. You had to wait X many years for it to grow. So you said, you know, after you did all this, you then sort of started your development business kind of more seriously.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, what was your first development deal of yours that you maybe were in full time? Maybe something like this.
Well, I mean, I as I say, it's probably the flat I did in Elgin Avenue was, which again I did with my parents. We did together. They were silent. They didn't really get involved too much, but. It was as I say, 3 beds. It was a 2-bed. I turned it into a 3-bed. Purchased it for 645. Spent a couple $100,000. A lot of structural works to do, and had obviously various other costs. And we made about 200,000, give or take, before tax on that, which kind of drove things forwards. And then off the back of that, we bought another flat on Barnsdale Road in Maida Vale, which didn't do quite so well. It wasn't a terrible deal. I think it was like a 10% yielding deal, which, you know, look, if you could do a 10% yielding deal every day of every year, you would probably, of course, yeah. But, you know, when you're aiming to do sort of 20% or whatever, it's not ideal. But, so we bought that and did that. And then things really started to snowball when I met my partner, who's not involved in property really, but he's a very successful businessman and invested in me, I guess. Yeah. And then we started, we both put our money in the pot. By this point, I built up quite a lot of capital from the other deals, and we put the money together and we started sort of the Knight James companies, which I now run. And we've now done 8 deals together. This would be our 8th.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a lot of people are looking for a business partner, a JV partner.
Yeah.
I think everyone dreams when they start with that silent partner who's just like, here's a couple mil, do your thing, pay me, see you in 12 months. How did that relationship sort of form? Like, how did he know he could trust you, and how did you know you could trust him? Was it just time and hanging out, or was there something?
No, so I was invited to some drinks by my old boss and valuer from Foxtons, who are now successful developers in their own right, and they invited me to these drinks, and he was actually, you know, in business with them in some form. And not that I went there to poach their investor, but anyway, it was just the way something life pans out. And I turned up on time, and I always use this as a way to say to people, you should always be on time. Because if I had my business partner now was only there for probably 15-20 minutes, half an hour, and if I hadn't been there, we would have never met. So I always use that to say, this is why you should be on time. But yeah, so I met him there. he asked me what I was doing. I said, I'm a developer, I'm just starting out, doing it professionally. He said, are you looking for an investor? I said, yes, I am. Of course I am.
When people ask that,
Of course I am. It's like, you're in your head, you're like, whoa, I've been waiting for someone to ask me this for how many years. And that was that. And I did it wasn't easy. I mean, I did at least 6 months of due diligence, probably between solicitors. I had to show him 2 or 3 profit and losses for deals I'd done to prove what I was saying was true. The guy's a very, very sharp guy, and nothing really gets past him. And he belt and braces with everything he did, which was good because I kind of felt like it gave me confidence as well. So I thought, well, if he believes in me, as successful as he is, then that gives me confidence to move forward. So eventually, we got things agreed, and lots of legal wranglings and solicitors' fees, and then we got the company set up. And as I say, we've done 8 deals together. I think we've probably done 4 great deals, 2 that have been pretty good, and 2 that I would say weren't good deals. One of which lost money.
Okay, so we'll definitely come to this. I want people to see the balance of things, right?
Yeah.
So when did you switch from Maida Vale, which is, I guess, still London, but would you call this Prime London? Are we in Prime?
Yeah, I would, yeah.
When did you switch from there to Prime London? Which, if anyone from the north, what's the difference between London and Prime, and then Super Prime?
Yeah, I mean, I always think Prime London, it depends if you're talking about values or areas. I always think Prime London is sort of probably 2 million plus, and Super Prime is probably 5 or 10 million plus, in my opinion. In terms of areas, I would say that Prime London would be areas like Notting Hill, Little Venice, those areas which are probably £1,500 a square foot, £1,700–1,800 a square foot. Super Prime London, going into like the really expensive parts, would be SW7 here, South Kensington, Knightsbridge, Belgravia, Mayfair. I would say they're the only super prime areas. I mean, there are parts of Notting Hill where you can get 2,500–3,000 square foot. Same with Holland Park. Some of the big houses on Clarendon Road around there, all the different Stanley Gardens in Notting Hill. There's some really mega, it's an amazing road. But that was how I would define it, either by area or by price.
Okay,
so they're correlated.
Yeah. So how did you make that transition then from, let's say, maybe under $1 million-ish in Maida Vale to now just being prime central London, where we can walk to, the National History Museum, Imperial College London.
Yeah.
We are
Hyde Park's here.
Yeah, Harrods is up the road.
Yeah.
How did you make that transition, and why?
It kind of was organic. I tend to go where the deals are. So as much as I viewed myself as a Maida Vale developer through and through, and then all of a sudden there was hardly any deals I was seeing in Maida Vale, and then I was looking at Bayswater and North Kensington and Notting Hill. And I ended up just buying in those areas because I saw things that I thought offered good value. I did a great deal last year in Earls Court, which is one of the best deals I've done, and we've never done anything in Earls Court, but it just seemed cheap. It's first floor flat, £1 million, 1,000 square foot, massive ceilings like this, not as big as this, but big. And the layout was abysmal: 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, all these mezzanines everywhere. It was terrible. And I just thought, this has got to be cheap at this price. So nothing ventured, nothing gained, and we bought it. And I guess the step up was that instead of doing Maida Vale developments, we started to do Notting Hill based developments, which obviously is a price point above. So first time buying Notting Hill is probably 700 or 800 grand for most buyers, whereas in Maida Vale it might be 400 or 500. So it kind of does leap up 50% probably. Yeah. And then we just kind of leapfrogged around. So I've done 2 developments in North Kensington, which is similar to Maida Vale prices, and I've done a couple in Bayswater, which I think is undervalued, and I've done a few in Notting Hill.
Was it scary having that bigger jump, longer refurbs, longer time frame, maybe longer interest periods if you were borrowing anything? Was it kind of a bit of was there fear around jumping up?
I don't think there was. I don't want to come across as sort of cocky and say that there wasn't any fear. I think doing these developments, I'm so busy all the time. Like I get up at 6 a.m. almost every day. I'm constantly on my phone, and I'm working probably 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And I just think you just don't really have time to be nervous about it. You just got to get on with it and hope. Keep your prices low, buy well, keep your prices low, manage the build well, and just try and learn as you go along. And so no, I wasn't scared, but I was aware that we were now talking bigger numbers. I think that the big step up for me was I bought a place with my partner in Sherland Road, above commercial. A lot of developers don't like stuff above commercial or basements, whereas we will look at stuff anywhere if we think it works. And got planning permission for a huge roof terrace on the top of it. And it was a terrace of butterfly roofs in a conservation area, which are not normally allowed to break. They don't like it, especially in Westminster. But ours had this ugly concrete roof, flat roof, chucked on the top of it. And I thought to myself, well, if they're telling me I've got to improve the conservation area to get planning, surely by taking that ugly roof off, I'm going to improve it. So what we did is we submitted 2 planning applications, one for this huge mansard extension, which we knew they'd knock us back on. That was kind of like the decoy, I guess. And then the other one was like what we wanted. And the guy was like, your mansard is ridiculous, we can't give you that. And I was like, oh, okay, what about the terrace? He's like, all right, I might be able to consider that. And so we made a few changes that they wanted, and they gave us planning. And I think it probably added $250,000 to the value of that flat, just for that roof terrace. I mean, it probably cost us about 70 grand to build, so it wasn't cheap, but it was, and that was the first sort of big money deal in terms of over $1 million that I did. I sold that for 1.4, and I paid 775 for it. And that's still percentage-wise the best deal I've ever done, I think.
And how did you know that certain things were going to add value? Because, for example, in Yorkshire, you don't need to do any of the plaster work you've done there. You just need to give it, look at paint, new kitchen, new bathroom, and you've added, in percentage terms, so much value. How did you know that, like, these little things, such as a concrete roof, such as the shape of it, made it cheap, and you knew you could make it better? Like, how did you get that knowledge?
I think, as I said, I was an agent for 8 or 9 years, and I'm very obsessive about property. Mm-hmm. I mean, anyone that's ever worked with me as an estate agent in the past will tell you that I was always learning as much as I could and trying to sponge information. I would shadow other developers. I would always be reading. I've always tried to take on information from as many people as possible. And I genuinely love property. I mean, I don't shut up about it. And that I think that's helped. And I've been able to learn over the last 15 years by just asking questions. And I think a lot of people, unless you really love what you do, you're never going to have that level of knowledge because you're not really that bothered about whether you learn something else. Do you know what I mean? So I think I've just learned over time, and I've been doing it. I feel quite old now. I've been doing it, coming up to 20 years.
And do you think London is inaccessible to most? Do you think there's a learning period, or if I was new to property and I knew some stuff, did some reading, whatever, I could say, right, let me buy something and I was caught for a mil. Do you think that's
I don't think you could do it from the get-go. I think I have I try and put myself out there to people, and a lot of friends will contact me and ask for help with stuff, and I always try and give them my time, because when I was starting out, I needed that from people more and more, and people gave it to me, and that's why I think I was able to learn.
Yeah.
So friends always ask me, I've got like 300 grand spend, what could I buy? And 300 grand in London doesn't get you much. So I normally say to people, you should buy something that's a little bit dilapidated, maybe a studio flat that you can extend, or you can turn into a 1-bed or whatever, buy out in the suburbs where it's a bit cheaper, add value, live in it for a couple of years as your main home, and then springboard from there to then buy something at 600, 700, 800 grand if you can, and at the same time work on increasing your income so you can leverage your wages to earn more. But I have to be honest with you, most of my friends that ask me advice about property don't take my advice, which always annoys me, because I'm like, I've spent so long trying to help you, and they end up buying a new build with Help to Buy scheme or whatever, which I don't blame them, because the government's obviously pushing them down that route. But I am not a big fan of new builds. I always think that really the developers who are selling them have taken all the value out of them anyway.
Yeah, and they sell it at above normal anyway.
And that may sound hypocritical, because you can say, well, I'm taking the value out of this flat, but I'm selling one of them and it's unique. I'm not selling 200 of these flats in a row, which when you come to let them, you can't, because you've got another 50 people doing the same.
Exactly.
So I always prefer to buy old.
So then, speaking of like buying in London, let's kind of maybe talk through the deal we're in.
Sure.
Let's start with the beginning. How did you source it? How did you find it? How did you come across it? Was it online?
No, yes it was. So almost everything I buy is available to any Tom, Dick and Harry on the market.
I love that.
Yeah?
People say, if it's online, it's too late.
That's rubbish.
It's
honestly.
rubbish, yeah.
It's. I think that's so not true. I think it's all about finding the angle, and a lot of people that make the money, I think, in residential development doing single units like this it's about finding an angle that other people miss. Yeah. And even like the best developers miss angles. I've met fabulously successful developers who I've seen them miss things, and I'm like, how did you miss that? But sometimes, you've got too much going on, or so I buy almost everything from from what's open market stuff.
Okay.
I bought my own home that I live in now in Maidavale actually at auction. It's the only thing I bought auction is actually my own home where I live. But everything else is just open market. And this came to me from an agent contact of mine who I bought another property through in Earls Court. And good guy, he's become a friend of mine now. And yeah, it just came to me. He said, look, there's a great flat. There's lots of legal problems with it. But if you can figure out how to make it work, I think you should buy it. It's great. So I came to see it.
And how long had it been on the market before you saw it? Do you remember?
I think it had been on for a few weeks, which I should probably tell him off about. He didn't tell it to me earlier, actually. He just reminded me of that. But sometimes that's good because it takes the sort of heat out of the market, people chasing it. So I think it'd been on for a few weeks. In fact, it must have been longer than that because there was a few developers that were trying to buy this, and it had fallen through with them because of the issues with the license restoration and the freeholders.
So you saw this with legal issues, and 80% of people thought, I'm out here. This is too much hassle. And what kind of state was it in when you viewed it? How would you describe it?
I describe it as ex-rental.
So it's livable, but not
It was
nice.
livable, yeah. You could live here. If you gave it a deep clean, it would be fine. You could live here.
Things weren't falling off, it wasn't...
No. I mean, some of the stuff we buy is literally looks like it's been hit by a missile, But some of it is actually in quite good condition. I bought a couple of flats that have been in pretty good condition,
So what were the legal issues? And can you explain what they are for people who don't know?
Sure. So with this flat, there had been issues with the freeholder. It was a charitable trust that owned the freehold, and they were known to be quite difficult. They weren't replying to emails. Just like unfortunately, a lot of freeholders are. They're just not that interested to help you really, because unless they're making money, I guess it's not really in their interest. So the license for alteration here, because of the way the flat...
What's a license for alteration?
Sorry, so license for alteration is the permission, the consent that you get from the freeholder to carry out the works that you want to do.
And that means any work?
Well, generally, it depends on how the lease is worded. This lease had been rewritten by the current freeholders, and it was the tightest worded lease I'd ever seen. I've seen a lot of leases. And it was essentially, you cannot do anything in here without our permission. So
you couldn't even paint, you couldn't change the scope?
You could paint, but it's listed, so we can't change the scope. But yeah, I mean, we could have painted, but we couldn't have moved stud walls, we couldn't have done a lot of things. Couldn't do any structural works. And you just know, whenever I buy something, the first thing I do is Google who the freeholder is, do a company's house check, I go through their account, I go through everything. Because you need to know who you're up against, right? If you've got a huge property company who are the freeholder, the chances are they're going to take you for every pound they can on the fees, yeah? Whereas if it's a single person downstairs in the building, they're probably going to be a bit more reasonable. You can knock on their door and say, So I knew that this charity were going to be difficult. I'd asked a few friends in the industry, like, what do you know? And they were like, look, just be careful, they're going to be quite tricky. I'm being polite. And everyone had been aware of this, I think, buying it, and people weren't prepared to buy it without the license alteration premium, which is the cost you pay to the freeholder to get consent for the works, being agreed prior to exchange.
To give them security and safety. That can do stuff.
Because what they were worried about was that normally I wouldn't agree that before exchange, I would do it afterwards, because normally people are reasonable. But what people are worried about is they might go, right, we'll give you consent, but we want £300,000 as the premium for you to do.
And they can say whatever.
They're not regulated by anything, unless you could take it to, obviously take it to a tribunal or whatever, but because the lease was so tightly worded, normally it says not to be unreasonably withheld on a lease, which that is the key phrase. If you've got that in a lease, you're fine, because if it goes to a tribunal, they're going to say, well, you're being unreasonable by charging £300,000 to add one wall. Whereas because of our lease was so tight,
and you didn't say that.
Didn't say it. It had been taken out.
I love that.
Everything was worded so tightly. So because of that, no one wanted to exchange without all of this in place. And trying to do a license for alteration on a grade 2 listed